Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. And today I have with me Shari Leid, author of Table for 51, Lessons Learned from Sharing Meals Across America. Shari, welcome.
Thank you. I can't believe we're here now. It's been a project in the works, and here we are.
Yeah, very exciting. Tell us a little bit about your background and sort of leading up to, and that could be a part of your writing journey where that got started. But I always like to hear about how people stepped into the process that has now led us to where we are today.
Yes. Well, by training, I'm an attorney. I was a former litigator and went and stayed home with my kids after several years of practicing law. Then it came time for me to figure out what I really wanted to do in life. And I decided I wanted to coach. I happened to be on a coaching training call when there was a woman who publishes books on there. And it had been my lifelong dream to write a book. So I decided I'm going to just go for it. And that was 3 books ago. And actually, this is my 4th book, Table for 51. And as anything else, I always say, read what I last wrote. It's a lot better than what I wrote before. So I become what I would consider a good writer. And I write now for publications. Magazines, online digital magazines, and I am a friendship expert now, which we can dive into at some point. But this is really a passion from my heart.
That's beautiful. Yeah, tell us a little bit about being a friendship expert. That's not something I hear frequently.
Yes. So, the way I started my writing career is between my 49th and 50th birthday. I sat down with 50 women who were in my life, some long-term friends, others more recent acquaintances, and just to tell them what I learned from them. And because at the time I was an oversharer on social media, I was sharing these meetings, and that organically became a book. And I found such a powerful result, both in myself and the women I sat down with, that I started to do this on a regular basis. And 150 or so interviews later, and not only interviews, but I started writing about friendships, about the things I learned. And I began to be asked for interviews on friendships. And in fact, Table for 51 really is about the power of making friends and creating connections, even with strangers and people who seem very different than you at first glance.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And then do you coach people in terms of their friendship relationships? How does that work?
I don't advertise. As a friendship coach, I am a reinvention coach, but I will guarantee you every single coaching session or group of sessions ends up going back into relationships because, whether it's relationships at work, relationships with your family members, we're the 2 basic things that we need. And this is what Table for 51 has is connection with someone else and food.
Yeah, that's so great. That's sustenance, right? Beautiful. And tell us a little bit also about the reinvention coach and what does that mean?
Well, throughout my life, I found that I've reinvented. And I think that's what we're always doing. We're here to learn. We're constantly, reinventing ourselves as life throws us different curveballs. And what I do when I work with people is a lot of the people I work with have lived these kind of checklist lives is what I call them. They're very successful people. They've gotten their degrees a lot of times. They're in their quote unquote dream job. They've got their life partner, but something feels like it's missing. And it's because a lot of times to get here, they've been doing the checklist things. So we sit down and we really look at their lives and create a life that feels more authentic and in flow, that really is who they are now, what their talents are, what their, for lack of better words, purpose is to be here. That's outside the checklist lifestyle that they've built.
Interesting. So I'm thinking about these conversations that you have had over a meal that you describe in the book. And I'm real interested in that intersection between your reinvention coaching and those conversations. Do you see that there are places where those intersect in a really interesting, powerful way?
Well, not on purpose, but I will tell you, sitting down with all of these women, many who are strangers before we sat down, or people I had lost contact with for decades before, it's made me a better coach. And it's made me a better human being as well, because I got to hear their stories, and it made me a stronger person, and see how each one of these women have reinvented themselves, whether on purpose or not. It's because life throws us these curveballs. And it's what we do with them. And when we realize that we are all connected, this journey started with me looking for what connects us. And what I found is, as I went along, these strangers not only became my friends, but they became my teachers. And these women, it was almost as if I was having a continuous conversation across the U.S., but just the body and the voice changed. It was absolutely life-changing, because these were women from all different races, different economic levels, religious beliefs, political beliefs, education levels, a very diverse group of women. And in fact, we meet now on Zoom calls, these women, and they're connected through this project. And at the end of the project, I told them I was going to create a survey and find out where everyone stood religiously and politically, because I was curious and I would share this. I did do that survey, but I decided not to share it, because I decided I don't want to ruin this incredible connection that we have because of labels and what we think somebody is because of maybe what we believe their beliefs say about them.
What would you say is one of the most powerful things for you personally that you learned from these conversations?
There are a couple of very powerful things, and the learning continues. I keep thinking of, every state. People always ask me, what was your favorite state? What was your favorite meeting? And it's hard for me to pinpoint one, because I think I have something for every part of my life. But one thing that happened to me during this journey is these were very organic conversations. I didn't have a list of questions, but one thing I kept asking was, what feels like home? Especially for the women who had moved to different places, what feels like home? And I was flying back and forth to Seattle. I'm based out of Seattle, or driving back and forth. And I lived at the time in this beautiful home that my former husband and I had remodeled, and it had so much of me in it, and it stopped feeling like home. I couldn't figure out, why did this place not feel like home? And, I realized, well, one, it was my marriage. So at the end of this, spoiler alert, I end up leaving a 27-year marriage. But I realized in this process, I realized this as I was writing, and I saw that this question had come up for me several times. What feels like home? What feels like community? That all my life, from the time I'm an adoptee, and I was orphaned, from the time I was orphaned, I had always been looking for what home was. And I didn't realize that was this journey. And in the end, I found home really is where you create community. And a woman in Maine said it best. She said, everywhere feels like home to her, because while other people wait for community to come to him, come to her, or come to them, he doesn't. He goes out and creates community. And because she does that, every place can feel like home.
So I was struck by you saying that you left a 27-year marriage. I also left a 27-year marriage.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is interesting. That's not that common. And it takes so much strength to do. It takes so much strength to do. My favorite quote is, if today, or the quote or question is, if today were the last day of your life, would you be doing what you're doing now? And, I think about that all the time, and sitting down with people across the meal and getting to know them. Absolutely. I wish I could do that every day.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love that question about home. It feels to me like a very powerful question. I think without sort of off the cuff, we might think about house, and house is not home. Sometimes home can be at a house, it can feel that, like your house can have that vibe to it, I think largely if we have the relationships in there.
Yes.
If our community is sort of centered in that space, we tend to think of that space as home. But I love that you've been exploring that question. What are some of the other questions that you've sort of developed over the course of these meals that you found yourself asking many different women?
Well, one of the things through these meals, not so much a question, but what I realized is, and I just did a TEDx talk on this recently, is that we really owe it to this next generation to show them connection. And it's something as simple as sitting down. And what I realized is the feeling that I got from sitting down at a table. And I did some, for preparing for my TEDx to talk about this, I did some research, and it's scientific. It's, in our bodies that when we sit down with someone across the table, it lowers our stress. All our happy hormones come out. Dopamine, serotonin's lifted, our cortisol levels, our stress hormones are lowered. And it opens us up to connection with the person across the table. And I realized what I was able to do is something we've done since the dawn of time, and that is sharing food. And sharing food has always meant safety, security, and belonging. And from this book, from this project, from this experience, I brought it back home and thought, okay, I can't stop this now. So there's actually a community, and it's in the book. It's called Flip the Box. And the idea behind Flip the Box is because I was orphaned and found in a cardboard box. This project really was flipping that box over and making it a symbolic table where everyone has a seat. So my goal with this movement, this Flip the Box movement, is that we simply go out and ask somebody to share a cup of coffee with us, share a meal with us. And just the simple ask from that is ask that other person to pass it on. And hopefully we can create this ripple effect. Because with AI and virtual working spaces and all of this, we've done a really good job to show the next generation how to disconnect from one another, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. We've done a horrible job of showing this next generation how to connect. And this is in part why we have this epidemic of loneliness in our country. And what I've learned, sitting down is the feeling you get, not just the questions, but the feeling you get of having someone across the table from you and asking questions and having a conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. When you're talking about all that happens when we're sitting across the table from each other, I was thinking about the breaking of bread and how, and also how there are cultures where even, when you show up as a stranger, you are welcomed into that meal. And what a powerful experience that is, a powerful connector that is, especially when it's with people we don't know.
Yes.
And how beautiful that is. Yeah.
And I was surprised how open people were to meet with me. And they didn't know me from Adam, right? And they were so open to meet with me. And it's awkward at first to ask somebody that you don't know very well. And I get it. It's awkward. But trust me, it gets easier the more you practice it.
Mm. And how did you identify who those people were going to be?
So I needed to find the women first so I could plan the travel. And 21, I got on my own. And they were people like, for instance, my web designer. She's in Indiana. Never met her in person before. Or it'd be someone like you. We've never met in person. I'd say, hey, I'm going to your state. Can we meet? So 21, I gathered that way. Then I went out on social media and said, here's my project. Who do you have for me? And because most of this travel I was doing myself, I chose to meet with women. And so they would send me their aunts, their cousins, their former roommates. And I came down to 13 states where I had no contacts. And from there, I thought, okay, my biggest fear was somebody would no-show me. And I started to look then for business owners that were in the area, because I figured, well, if they have a business, then at the very least, I could go into their business and say, hey, we have lunch date here. And, some of it was a planning process that took 3 months to plan and then another year to execute after that. So there were a couple of places where women fell by the wayside for one reason or another, including some moving out of the state that I was going to. But man, I swear, you put something out there and the right people come in at the right time. And I believe everyone that I met with, I was supposed to meet with them when I did.
That's so beautiful. Let's just take a short pause and we'll come right back. Author Shari Leid, abandoned in a cardboard box with no identifying information in Seoul, South Korea, and adopted by Japanese-American parents, embarks on a remarkable journey across the U.S. to challenge her father's fears of being unwelcome because of their Asian faces. In Table for 51, Shari meets strangers and reconnects with people from her own past, sharing a meal in every state. From bustling city cafes to peaceful countryside tables, each encounter reveals the power of human connection. Through these 50 heartfelt conversations, Shari discovers the magic of belonging and the courage to embrace change, ultimately ending her turbulent 26-year marriage. Get your copy today and join the conversation on Amplify Audiobooks. So let's talk a little bit about the audiobook process for you. And I know that when we first talked that you were clear you wanted to narrate the audiobook yourself. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
It was a lot harder than I thought. It was interesting because it's so different when you're reading out loud and reading your book out loud. I absolutely have so much respect for voice actors now. Some words, all of a sudden I realized I've never said those two words close to each other before, and I couldn't get my mouth to work the right way to pronounce things correctly. But I had such a great engineer with me who was very patient.
That's great. And what would you say was, I always like to ask this, like, what was the most surprising thing for you in the audiobook process overall? Now, that could have been with your narrating. It could have been some other part of the process. What jumps out as most surprising?
I think the most surprising was the difficulty for me, to tell you the truth of it. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go in there and read what I wrote. That has to be easy. And it's like when I said, every time I write, I say, read the last thing. And if I did another book again, I definitely want to read it again because I know I'll be better this next time. And I believe that as I was reading the book and saying it, I thought, well, I should have read this backwards because I think the end is better than the beginning, just because I got used to the rhythm of even my own voice and how to read and how to look at the page where I wasn't reading too far ahead, but reading ahead far enough so that it flowed well.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's so helpful. We have many listeners who are considering narrating their own audiobooks, so that I find it, I want to provide for them different experiences, or to hear about other people's experiences and what that's been like. Is there anything else about the process overall that either felt like maybe the biggest challenge or anything else that maybe was like turned out surprisingly great for you? Tell us more about the process.
If I were to do it again, so I didn't really, for some reason, I listen to audiobooks all the time and I didn't realize how much acting and entertaining is involved in reading your audiobook. And I wasn't prepared for that. So my mindset would be different if I was doing it again, more in the acting space, I believe. And you guys did the contact person I had with your production company was excellent. And I might ask more questions about, how should I act, or what should my voice, tone changes be, or maybe even if I should try to rewrite this a little bit more so that it is less of me reading maybe a newspaper, a news article, and more of an acting entertainment type of production. So I don't know. I'm looking forward to listening to me, actually. I'm seeing how I ended up.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for all that. And what's your aspiration with this project going forward? What's next for it?
Well, as I was mentioning before, this has turned into a movement called Flip the Box, where I'm inviting people. So in my own home, once a month, I invite 3 people that don't know each other. And it doesn't matter gender at this point. And we bring potluck. It's very simple. Bring whatever you want to share. and I introduce them to one another. And my only ask is that they pay this forward. Maybe not with a potluck, maybe going out to Dutch with another person they don't know. And I'm actually going to take this concept on the road again and help facilitate these flip the box dinners around the country.
That's great. That's so beautiful. And what would you love for your readers and listeners to take away from the experience of your book or audiobook?
I would love for them to simply ask somebody to the table, simply ask somebody to share a cup of coffee, whether it's a neighbor, a coworker, a family member, a stranger. You know, this whole idea of me taking the box I was found in as a baby and flipping it over to make a table. As I looked around and looked at everyone, I realized there's boxes that we're all carrying. There's something that's stopping all of us from connection. What is that box? What is that box for you? And take the time now to flip it and create connection, because that's what we're here for. We're here for the experience of one another, and we can learn so much from each other.
That's so beautiful and so true. Yes, thank you. Could you tell our listeners what your website is so that they can know where to go to find, learn more about you and your writing and all that?
Yes, so it's kind of a mouthful, but it is animperfectlyperfectlife.com. So that is animperfectlyperfectlife.com. Or it's really easy just to Google my name, Shari, Shari, and Leid, Leid. And I'm on all the social and media spots.
Great. Beautiful. And your audiobook, of course, will be on Amplify Audiobooks at the time that this is released. So we encourage our listeners to get a copy on Amplify Audiobooks. It is the platform that will best support Shari and her work going forward. Shari, thank you so much for being with me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely. And I hope one day we can share a meal.
I hope so too. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.